All right, on to chapter 16 of the book of Deuteronomy. Now, in this chapter, there's two major things that we're going to talk about here. One is the feasts. The other is about judges and judging people. So let's talk about a few of these things. I'm not going to read a lot of these first 17 verses because it goes into more detail on the feasts. So if you would like to read those, you can. Just realize it's talking about here observing the feasts that they have. There's lots of ritual feasts that the Israelites have, like the Passover feast. Okay, remember that's commemorating them being liberated from Egypt. That was during the time of the final plague, when the firstborn of all of Egypt and Hebrews died, unless they put the blood on their doors and had the feast. There's a feast of unleavened bread. There's other kinds of feasts that they have in here. And so they're going to talk about these for these first 17 verses, which is good. A lot of good feasts, the good ideas. I'm just not going to read all the verbiage and go through them, basically. Verse 10, the Feasts of Weeks, is interesting here. It's a free will tribute offering, which thou shalt give, as the Lord thy God hath blessed thee. So this one's, the free will offering is a type of feast that I wanted to talk about just for a second here, because this is a type of offering or sacrifice that's not required. So when you have these free will offerings, they are an offering that you give, and you are encouraged to give, but how much you give, when you give, all those things are up to you to determine. So some feasts, like the Feast of the Passover, some of the sacrifices for like a sacrifice for atonement, those ones, they're pretty set. Here's when you do them, here's why you do it, here's how you do it, here's how much you do it. Those ones are set, they're fixed. The free will offering ones, like the Feast of Weeks, is up to you to decide how much you're going to give, what are you going to contribute and do with this. So it's a really interesting type of sacrifice that they give. In our day and age, we call this fast offerings. Fast offerings or other donations to the church are free will offerings. You're encouraged to give, but how much you give, when you give, all those things is up to you to determine, which is a different type of sacrifice than, say, tithing. Hugh Nibley, in his book Approaching Zion, chapter 7, which if you want to understand more about chapter 7 of this book of Hugh Nibley's, go back about 2 or 3 chapters in Deuteronomy and watch our video, and we get into some explanations there. He says here, the word sanctified in the King James Version means the same as consecrated, which is set apart. And it is the law of consecration given as it is at the culmination of all the other laws. In all of this, Israel is being put to the test. The Feast of the Weeks requires a tribute of a free will offering of thine hand. The offering is required, it is tribute, but the amount is free will. You determine it yourself on the basis of how much the Lord has given you, what he has given you, even with what your God has blessed you. Bless here means to give. All that which the Lord has blessed you, or with which he may bless you. What is more, you must recognize any kindness shown you by others. So again, the free will offering is you need to give something, but it's up to you to determine how much, what you give, those kinds of things. Because back then, they didn't just give money, they gave resources, they gave animals, they gave other things, they gave crops and things like that. So the free will offering is an important test. How far are we willing to give? You know, a great way to look at it from us with fast offerings, because our society has pretty much boiled everything down to just money. Money is the exchange of everything. Back then, they had a little bit more of a barter economy where things had value and you would exchange things for things. We do everything with money these days. Money is kind of taken over as a ubiquitous trading vehicle for everything. So we use money, basically, in our free will offerings. So a good thing to think about is when you give fast offerings, if it doesn't hurt, like you give to the point where you get really worried about writing that check or putting that amount down, because that's a lot of money. That's enough money that it could negatively impact your life maybe a little bit, but because you're willing to give it. That is a great thing. That's where your blessings start to really take off. It's a test. Are we willing to give our stuff and love other people. So again, like Hugh Nibley brought up, this is pointing to consecration, which is a Zion society, helping us forget this idea of uh, loving stuff more than people. We need to get to that point. The world wants us to love stuff more than people. God wants us to love people more than stuff. So these types of things are moving us slowly to being more and more of a Zion society as we adopt them, as we live them, and do more with that. So some important points that are brought up in there. So let's jump up here to verse 18. Verse 17, every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord thy God, which he hath given thee. So lots of things that they're asked to give. Again, it's about getting used to this idea of not worrying so much about your stuff, not focusing on your stuff, but focusing on helping other people with your stuff. In fact, in Erdman's handbook to the Bible, there's a comment that was made here. It says, from very early times, the Jewish year was punctuated by the great festivals, the feasts of the Lord. Some were timed to coincide with the changing seasons, reminding the people of God's constant provision for them and providing an opportunity to return to God, some token of all that he had given. So these are the feasts that meet up with like solstice times, with planting, and then harvest times, follow some of the seasons as well. Great feasts, great things. You can look at this also with the ideas of Stonehenge, where they were places where people would come together to commemorate the year-right festivals. We've talked about that quite a bit. You get into the book of Abraham and things. That have these festivals to renew promises, to renew the kingships, to renew what's going on, to celebrate planting and harvesting, to enjoy realizing that we are reliant on the elements of this world, which are all controlled by God, to help us with our ability to live and to do things. Now, it says in here, more others commemorated the great events of Israel's history, the occasions when, in an unmistakable way, God had stepped in to deliver his people. All were occasions of wholehearted delight and enjoyment of God's good gifts, and at the same time sober gatherings to seek his forgiveness and cleansing. They were never intended to be observed out of mere formality and empty ritual. The prophets had sharp words for those who reduced them to this level. The purpose of the festivals was spiritual, a great and glorious meeting of God and his people. So this is the point of what these rituals were for. They didn't just do them to do them. I think we have a lot of holidays that we just, oh yeah, Labor Day or Memorial Day or whatever, President's Day or whatever. We do them, but we don't really think about why we're doing them. I think the 4th of July is probably the most purpose-driven one, other than maybe Christmas, possibly Thanksgiving in there as well. But for the Israelites, the purpose of these feasts were again commemorating that God is with us, that God is helping us. And here's not just reminders of our actual reliance on God with the more seasonal festivals, but the ones where these are commemorating specific events and dates in our history to remind us of the great things God has done for us. So the festivals were a meeting of man and God. They're not just a time to go hang out and party. It was realizing that we are here and dependent upon God, and he loves us and is paying attention to us and is here to help us. So powerful reminders for them to be spiritually minded more than physically minded, basically. All right, verse 18, judges and officers shalt thou make thee in all thy gates, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, throughout thy tribes, and they shall judge the people with just judgment. Thou shalt not wrest judgment, thou shalt not respect persons, neither take a gift, for a gift doth blind the eyes of the wise and pervert the words of the righteous, which is altogether just shalt thou follow, that thou mayest live and inherit the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. So what this is really getting into here is we need to appoint judges. We need to appoint people who can help be that neutral third party to reconcile differences. If two people have a difference of opinion on something and they're arguing over it, they can go to a judge who's a third party person who's neutral and that judge can help them to say, here's where the truth is, this is what you need to do. Now in verse 19, of course, thou shalt not wrest judgment or change the judgment, basically, or manipulate it. And it's talking about don't take a gift. So this is about bribery. So you can't bribe the judge. That's a bad thing. So you're not, the whole point of judgment is to judge righteously, not uh, subjectively, basically. You got to be objective with what you're doing on your judgments. It's interesting here, verse 21, thou shalt not plant thee a grove of any trees near unto the altar of the Lord thy God, which thou shalt make thee. Neither shalt thou set up thee any image which the Lord thy God hateth. So this is kind of a funny thing. Like, why would you not plant trees near there? That doesn't make sense. Why would God be worried about that? We have to realize that the altar of the Lord, of course, is in the temple, in the tabernacle. So they don't want trees around that tabernacle, basically. The point of this isn't so much the trees as it is that there is a fertility god that is very common at this period of time called Asherah or Asherah. If you look at verse 21, footnote A, it talks about this, that they would make they would carve into the trunk of a tree an idol, this idol of Asherah, basically, which was a fertility god. So again, planting these trees around and then carving that in would give you a false god or an idol to worship. And the God says, you can't do that at all. So we don't want trees around the tabernacle at all to prevent you from worshiping a false god, basically. So kind of an interesting ending to this chapter, but that's what it was. It's God is doing his best to help the Israelites to keep other gods out, to make it easy and clear for them who you worship. And he's trying to help them out because everybody else has gone away from the idea of the one true God, and they've worshipped false gods. They worship idols. They've worshipped these other things that aren't real, basically. So he's trying to help them to stay different from the world. Don't adopt the world's philosophies. Stick with my philosophies. Do what I want you to do, and that'll help you to be better and improve in your life. So let's jump to the next chapter to continue our journeys here to understand what are the things, these last final words of Moses to the children of Israel before they enter in the promised land.